The Iceman's Curse. A young journalist sat at his desk staring at a single page. His editor had just forwarded it. One page, 5 names, and a question he couldn't shake. The names belonged to people who had nothing obvious in common. Different countries, different professions, different ages. Their deaths had occurred years apart under entirely different circumstances. No shared workplace, no shared history, no logical reason to group them together in a single document. Every person on that list had been connected, however briefly, to the recovery, examination, or documentation of a set of ancient human remains pulled from the ice of the Alps. A prehistoric body. A man dead for 5,000 years. And for reasons no one could fully explain, the people who came closest to him kept dying. The journalist worked through each case methodically. Then he picked up the phone. It took 5 attempts before anyone answered. When a voice finally came through, it carried a thick German accent. Dr. Konrad Spindler, archaeologist. The man who had led the scientific examination of the remains. The journalist explained the apparent pattern. He asked carefully whether Spindler had any thoughts on whether the deaths might be connected. Spindler replied that as a scientist, he did not believe in curses. He added with dry humor that if such a curse did exist, it would presumably claim him next. And if that happened, this would likely be their last conversation. The call ended. 4 months later, Spindler was dead, and his name joined the list.
The discovery. On the 19th of September 1991, 2 German hikers, Helmut and Erika Siemens, were making their way through the high alpine region near the Ötztal Alps, close to the border between Austria and Italy, when they came across something embedded in the ice. Their first assumption was a fallen climber. It was not an uncommon tragedy in those mountains, but as they moved closer, that assumption dissolved. There was no modern equipment, no synthetic clothing, no signs of a recent accident. What lay before them was not the body of a mountaineer. It was something far older. They descended and reported what they had found. A recovery team was assembled over the following days. Extracting the body proved difficult. It was deeply encased in ice, and early attempts risked damage. Eventually, the remains were freed and transported to a mortuary for examination. The findings, published weeks later by Dr. Konrad Spindler of the University of Innsbruck, were extraordinary. Radiocarbon dating placed the man's death approximately 5,000 years earlier, during the late Neolithic period. He was not a climber. He was not a recent casualty. He was one of the oldest and best preserved human specimens ever recovered. He was named Otzi, after the Alps where he had been found. Further analysis revealed a man of some standing within his community. He had been carrying a copper axe, a flint dagger, and a set of unfinished arrows. He was not traveling lightly, and he was not defenseless. But the most significant discovery came from deep within his left shoulder. An arrowhead, lodged at an angle that suggested it had been fired from behind. The wound showed no healing, meaning he had died very shortly after it struck. Blood traces from at least 4 other individuals were identified on his equipment and clothing. Otzi had not simply died in the mountains. He had been hunted. He had fought. And whoever pursued him had finished what they started.
The deaths begin. The first to die was Rainer Henn, a forensic pathologist based in Innsbruck. Henn had been among the first specialists to examine the body at the recovery site. In 1992, while on a lecture tour discussing his involvement in the discovery, he was killed in a head-on road collision. He was 64 years old. Several months later, Kurt Fritz died. A 52-year-old mountaineer with deep knowledge of the Ötztal Alps, Fritz had guided Henn and other scientists to the recovery site, navigating the hazardous terrain and remaining present as the body was extracted. He later joined a small climbing group on a routine ascent in the same region. An avalanche struck during the climb. When the snow settled, The group checked one another for injuries. Everyone had survived. Everyone except Fritz. He was the only fatality. He had been struck directly and killed instantly. 2 deaths. 2 men who had stood beside the same body on the same mountain.
The pattern deepens. In the months after the discovery, Helmut Siemens, the hiker who had first found the body, assumed he and his wife would be compensated. Under regional law, anyone who discovers an object of significant historical value is entitled to a portion of its assessed worth. What followed instead was 12 years of legal dispute. Competing claimants emerged, arguing the Siemens had not truly been first to find the body. Provincial officials offered a token payment of 5,000 euros, describing it as symbolic. The couple refused and pursued the courts. In November 2003, the ruling came in their favor. Helmut and Erika Siemens were awarded $300,000 in compensation. They would never receive it. In October 2004, Helmut set out on a hiking trip in the same mountain range where the discovery had been made. He was 67 years old and an experienced alpine walker. When he failed to return, a search was launched. 8 days later, his body was found at the bottom of a 300-foot drop, partially buried in ice. The man who had found Ötzi frozen in the mountains had come to rest, frozen in those same mountains. Within days of his recovery, the head of the local rescue team, who had helped locate Helmut's body, suffered a fatal heart attack. He was 45 years old and had shown no prior signs of illness. The international press stopped calling it coincidence. Dr. Konrad Spindler had already dismissed the idea publicly, calling it superstition, saying the curse would take him next if it were real. His death, 4 months after that statement, from complications of a condition he had been managing for years, gave the media exactly what it needed. His name was added to the list. An Australian biologist named Tom Loy, whose genetic analysis had been crucial in reconstructing Ötzi's final confrontation, was found dead in his home in Brisbane in 2005. He was 63. Officially, natural causes. In 13 years, 7 people connected to the same discovery had died prematurely. No single cause, no shared exposure, no obvious explanation.
What science says, and what it doesn't. 2 comparable cases offer a partial framework. When Howard Carter opened the tomb of Tutankhamun in 1922, several members of the expedition died in the years that followed. Lord Carnarvon, who had funded the dig, died 4 months after the tomb was breached. Others followed. The media declared a curse. Science eventually responded with an explanation. Sealed tombs, undisturbed for centuries, can harbor mold, fungi, and ancient bacteria. Those who entered without protection inhaled spores their immune systems were not equipped to handle. The curse was biological. A similar explanation was offered when archaeologists opened the tomb of King Casimir IV in Poland in the 1970s, and several excavators subsequently fell ill. Again, sealed environment, dormant pathogens, unprotected exposure. But Ötzi was not in a sealed tomb. He lay open to ice and air, thawing and refreezing across thousands of years. There is no evidence of a shared pathogen. The deaths among those connected to his discovery had no single medical thread. Traffic accident, avalanche, brain tumor, heart failure, multiple sclerosis, natural causes. The question that remains. For those who reject the supernatural, the answer is statistical. In any group of people spread across years and geographies, some will die earlier than expected. When looked at in retrospect, coincidences can arrange themselves into patterns that feel deliberate, but are not. The human mind is built to find connections. Sometimes it finds them where none exist. For others, The answer begins with what Ötzi actually was. Not a specimen, not an artifact, but a man who was murdered. Shot from behind, left to bleed, left to freeze. His body rested undisturbed for 5,000 years until two hikers on an afternoon walk broke that silence. Whatever followed may have had nothing to do with curses. The case of Ötzi does not require belief in the supernatural. What it requires is honesty about the limits of coincidence and an acknowledgement that the past, when disturbed, does not always stay quiet. 7 deaths, 1 frozen body, and a phone call that ended with a scientist joking that if the curse was real, he would be next.